Welcome to Russian History Retold, Episode 317, The Patriarchs and Metropolitans of the Russian Orthodox Church, Part 1. Last time, we covered the history of the Cossacks. Today, we will begin to cover the list of Russian Orthodox's most influential leaders over the centuries, the Patriarchs and Metropolitans. As most of you are well aware, the Russian Orthodox Church has a deep connection with the Russian state today and in the past. It began with the likely forced baptism of the Rus in 988 under the rule of Vladimir the Great. Before the conversion, Patriarch Photius of Constantinople mentioned the supposed mass baptism of the Rus in 860, but there is no evidence that this actually happened. While never the Patriarch of the Rus, he is worth a mention. Depending on a few factors, the number of Russian patriarchs is between 16 and 18. They're split into two eras. The first, starting with the ascension of St. Job on January 23, 1589, ending with Patriarch Adrian after his death on October 16, 1700. Peter I stopped allowing the election of patriarchs and replaced them with the most holy governing synod. Surprisingly, the next patriarch's election would begin again after the overthrow of the provisional government and the rise of the Bolsheviks. The first of this line was St. Tikhon, with his election by the 1917-1918 local council of the Orthodox Church of Russia on December 4th, 1917. Prior to St. Job becoming the first Russian patriarch, we had 10 Metropolitans of Kiev and all Rus between 1325 and 1441. In 1448, the seat of the Russian Orthodox Church landed in Moscow with the election of St. Jonah. 17 Metropolitans served the church until 1589, when, as I mentioned, we had our first Russian patriarch. Some of these church leaders made significant differences in Russian history, while others left nothing but a name in the record books. I picked those who were influential in one way or another, or stoked controversy, or just had an interesting story to tell. Before we get into the life and times of these church leaders, we need to define the difference between a metropolitan and a patriarch. A metropolitan in the Eastern Orthodox realm is a position that's kind of above the archbishop, and he would be the highest authority within the metropolitan region in which he served. A patriarch is the head of the whole church, somewhat similar to the Pope in the Catholic religion. The first person we need to talk about is St. Peter of Moscow. Appointed by the Patriarch of Constantinople, Athanasius, after being nominated by King Boleslav Yuri II of Galicia in 1308, Peter moved his see, the area of ecclesiastical jurisdiction, from Vladimir to Moscow in 1325. This was met with great animosity, particularly by Mikhail Yaroslavich, Grand Prince of Vladimir and Tver. This tension made Peter ask for protection from the Grand Prince of Moscow, Ivan I. Peter would be known after his death in 1326 as the patron saint of Moscow. For the following 2 years, the seat would remain vacant until the appointment of Saint Theonostus in 1328. Born in Constantinople, he bravely refused to allow the church to pay tribute to the Mongols in Sarai. Theognostus would be tortured for this stance, but eventually, the Khan of the Golden Horde relented and allowed the Orthodox Church to be free of the need to pay tribute. Theognostus would pass away in 1353, having made known that his successor should be the future Saint Alexius. His position was known as the Metropolitan of Kiev and all Rus, as was his predecessors. even though their seat was in Moscow. Alexius was an interesting and influential person in Russian history, mainly because he was the spiritual tutor and regent of Dmitry Donskoy. His other student, Vladimir Andreevich the Bold, was someone I knew nothing about until now. He was a cousin of Dmitry, and he would join forces with Donskoy against Tver, Ryazan, Livonian Knights, and the Republic of Novgorod. During the Battle of Kulikovo against the Golden Horde, Vladimir led the cavalry, helping the Muscovite army win the day. Alexius was a key factor in the lack of a Mongol response, as he was summoned by Johnny Beg, the Khan of the Golden Horde, to cure his mother, Tadula Khatun, of blindness, which he accomplished according to legend. Alexius also had a very close relationship with Saint Sergius of Rodonez, one of the most venerated saints in Russian Orthodox history. He unsuccessfully tried to convince him to succeed him, instead leaving the seat open until the ascension of Saint Cyprian in 1381, 3 years after Alexius's death. Part of the reason for the open seat was a growing hostility between the Lithuanians and the Muscovites. Alexius had sent Cyprian to negotiate a peace between the warring factions, to no avail. While he was consecrated as the Metropolitan of Kiev and all of Rus, his seat was not recognized by Dmitry Donskoy, who instead appointed Pimen. Constantinople also did not acknowledge this, as with the case with Dmitry's next appointment, Saint Dionysius. Cyprian would finally be fully invested in his position as Metropolitan in 1390, where he would lead the church until his death in 1406. During his time as the head of the church, he fought hard to unify all the cities within Muscovy, as well as try his hand at rapprochement with Lithuania. His replacement, who took 2 years to seat, was a Greek named Saint Photius. His total lack of knowledge of the Russian language added to the chaos that surrounded his early years. When he arrived in Moscow, he found the church treasury bare due to rampant corruption. Photius did what he could to clean the church's act up, which he did with the help of Grand Prince Vasily I of Moscow. When he passed away in 1431, there was yet another 2-year gap between his reign and that of his successor, Metropolitan Gerasim. Little is known about his time as a Metropolitan, but his successor, Isidore of Kiev, would create a storm of controversy during his 5-year reign between 1436 and 1441. Born in 1385 in southern Greece, Isidore became a monk and resided in Constantinople, a city under increasing pressure from the Ottoman Empire. This pressure led to a decision by Isidore that would put him into direct conflict with the Grand Duke of Moscow, Vasily II. At the Council of Venice, held between 1431 and 1449, the Western Catholic Church, the Holy Roman Empire, and the representative of the Russian Orthodox Church, Isidore, met. They were all in agreement that the growing threat of the Ottoman Empire was creating a dangerous atmosphere in Byzantium, and that if the Christian world could unite, they could create a bulwark against their Muslim enemies and save Constantinople. On July 6, 1439, a union of the Eastern and Western Christian churches was announced, signed by several Orthodox bishops, including Isidore. Upon hearing of this, the Russian Orthodox Church denounced the union, arrested Isidore, and declared itself autocephalous or autonomous of the Byzantine Church. Isidore would escape captivity, making his way back to Constantinople, where he would witness Mehmet II's capture of the city by force. From there, he would head to Rome, where he would serve as a dean of the Sacred College of Cardinals from October 1461 until his death in 1463. Grand Prince Vasily II took it upon himself to appoint the next Metropolitan, which he did in 1448 with the Ascension of St. Jonah. While Patriarch Gregory III did not acknowledge the new Metropolitan, in actuality he had very little say in the matter. At this time, the seat's name was changed to the Metropolitan of Moscow and All Rus. This was tantamount to declaring the Russian Orthodox Church as an independent entity, although it would take another 145 years before it was acknowledged by the Byzantine Church. None of the following four Metropolitans, Jonah, Theodosius, St. Philip I, or St. Gerontius, made much of a difference in the Church or Russian history for that matter. It wasn't until Ivan III appointed Zosimus on September 25, 1490, that we had a Metropolitan who made a difference. Zosimus was the person who made the proposal that Moscow was now the third Rome after the fall of Constantinople. It was a claim that the Russian Church hoped would make it the preeminent Orthodox Church in the world. It was a daring assertion, but it was a kind of bold statement that Ivan III was looking for. Unfortunately for Zosimus, he would be caught up in a frenzy of religious zeal led by Archbishop Gennady of Novgorod, who claimed that he uncovered something known as the heresy of the Judaizers in 1487. The Judaizers were former Jews who had converted to Christianity, but still believed in following the teachings of the Old Testament. This would place a kind of a cloud over Zosimus's metropolitanate. Then, on May 17, 1494, he would be removed from the metropolitan throne on charges of heresy and sodomy. Zosimus would die on May 17, 1494, before any trial was held. The next two Metropolitans were Simon and Varlam. They served between 1495 and 1521. Simon would conduct a number of synods, also known as sobors, to contain the corruption that was still plaguing the Church. The Sobor of 1503 denounced the charging of fees for the ordination of priests as simony, considered a major sin. A number of laypersons, as well as some in the nobility. He also focused some of his reforms on the behavior of retired priests and deacons, many of whom were accused of debauchery. Varlam's tenure as Metropolitan went along quite without much fanfare or controversy in his first years. He staunchly opposed the Church owning land and serfs, but that's not what caused his fall from grace. Varlam's opposition to the divorce request of Grand Prince Vasily III was what caused him to be removed from office on December 18, 1521. Where he was sent off to a monastery to live out the rest of his life. Varlam would be replaced by Daniel, who would lead a controversial time as the head of the Russian Orthodox Church. He would agree with Vasily III's decision to divorce his childless wife, Solomonia Saburova. Vasily would marry Elena Glinskaya, the mother of the future Ivan the Terrible. He would bless Ivan IV in the Cathedral of the Dormition in 1533. Daniel's undoing would come with the death of Vasily III and his siding with Ivan Belsky over the Shuisky family in a battle for the control of the young Ivan. This would lead to his being defrocked, dying on May 22, 1547, in the Joseph Volokolmsk monastery where he's imprisoned. The next Metropolitan, St. Joseph, would be the ninth Metropolitan in Moscow to be appointed without the approval of the ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople. He would be a major influence in Ivan IV's early life when he was under the regency of his mother, Grand Duchess Elena Glinskaya. After her passing, his influence in the court would wane until Josephus's removal in January 1542. He would be replaced by Saint Macarius, who would serve as the Metropolitan of Moscow for 21 years. At first, Macarius smartly gained the trust of Andrei Shuisky, which allowed him to gain influence over the young Ivan. His court machinations enraged the Boyar Duma, but he ingratiated himself with the growing Grand Prince. Macarius would bless the marriage of Ivan to Anastasia Zakharina Yuryeva, the mother of the future Tsar and last of the Rurikid line, Fyodor I. Anastasia was also the great-aunt of the first Romanov Tsar, Mikhail. One of the most important jobs that Macarius would have had little to do with the church itself. When Ivan took his army to lay siege of Kazan in 1559, the Tsar left the Metropolitan to run Moscow and deal with diplomatic negotiations with foreign powers. Much of what we know of Ivan's reign is due to Macarius's hand in compiling the chronicle of the beginning of Tsardom of Tsar and Grand Prince Ivan Vasilievich. Macarius would gradually remove himself from any influence over the Muscovite state until his death on January 12, 1563. Macarius's replacement, Athanasius, would step into his seat as Metropolitan during a rather difficult time. Ivan started his reign of terror on the boyar class by creating the Oprichnina. Athanasius was strongly opposed to Ivan's policies, which led some to believe led to his premature death just 2 years after his appointment in 1566. Athanasius's replacement, St. Herman, would not last the year, as he was even more vehemently opposed to Ivan's Oprichnina and the violence that followed it. Herman would die the following year after being banished from Moscow. His successor, St. Philip II, would meet a worse fate than his two predecessors. While Athanasius and Herman were private with their criticism of Ivan, Philip, to his dismay, was not. He was pretty open about his opposition to the Oprichnina and demanded that in order for him to accept the position of Metropolitan of Moscow and all of the Rus, that it must be abolished. 2 years into his control of the See of Moscow, it is rumored that he was murdered by order of Ivan. After Philip was arrested under some contrived charges of sorcery and dissolute living, he was strangled in his prison cell by Malyuta Skutarov, one of the most notorious leaders of the Oprichnina. Little is known of the time that Philip's successor, Kirill III, except that he was in Moscow during the raid on the city by the Crimean Khan Devlet I Giray, which almost destroyed the entire city. Cyril would pass away on February 5th, 1572. A few months later, Metropolitan Anthony would take the helm of the Russian Orthodox Church. His 9-year reign was a difficult one, as not only was Ivan still wreaking havoc with the boyars, but he was also involved in a number of foreign wars, which were severely damaging the Russian economy and society in general. Selected by Ivan in his last years, Anthony's replacement, Dionysius, would navigate the troubling times after Fyodor's death and with the ascent of the feeble-minded Fyodor I. Dionysius would try to get Fyodor to divorce his wife, Irina Godunova, sister of Boris Godunov. This would lead to his banishment in 1587 when he was replaced by the last of the Muscovite Metropolitans, St. Job. St. Job would become the 17th Metropolitan in Moscow to be appointed without the approval of Constantinople's ecumenical patriarch, and he would be the last. In his time, the patriarch in Constantinople, Jeremias II, knew that he had little to no control over the church in Moscow, partly due to being under the thumb of the Ottoman Empire. Job was the ideal candidate to become the first Russian patriarch. For 15 years, Job toiled as a monk in the cloister near his hometown of Staritsa. There he met Ivan IV, who took up part-time residence during the Oprichnina. Not considered exceedingly bright, Job impressed everyone with his incredible memory, reading extremely long passages from Orthodox prayer books without ever looking at them. Fyodor the first appointed Job Archbishop of Rostov, and then Moscow, a Metropolitan, and of all Russia on December 11th, 1587. Although this was done with the oversight of the de facto ruler at the time, Boris Godunov. Godunov knew that to strengthen his grasp on power, he would have to forge a stronger relationship with the Russian Orthodox Church. The best way he knew how was to convince Patriarch Jeremias II to appoint Job as a patriarch in his own right. On February 5th, Job was elected in 1589. Job was elected the first patriarch of Moscow and all Russia. Because Godunov helped Job rise to this lofty position, Job would put all his support behind Boris to take complete control over the government after the death of the last Rurikid ruler, Fyodor, on January 17, 1598. When the mysterious death of Tsarevich Dmitry Ivanovich, Fyodor's half-brother, came to light in 1591, Job took the stance that Boris Godunov was innocent of any wrongdoing and that his sudden death was a mere accident. Before Boris took the reign as Tsar of Muscovy, Job was the country's leader for a few months in 1598. After an official church inquiry into Dmitry's death found that an accidental self-stab wound caused his demise, Job handed the leadership position to Godunov. Patriarch Job would be involved in the condemning of the first false Dmitry during the early days of the time of troubles. Armed supporters of the false Dmitry charged into Job's home at the Cathedral of the Dormition and, with the help of a boyar named Barasimov, declared Job a traitor and removed him from office. Job returned to Moscow after his usurper Ignatius was removed in 1606, but he gave up his claim to the patriarchate to his successor, Saint Hermogenes. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Join me next time when we wrap up this two-part series by following the Patriarchs of Moscow, their end in 1700, the return of the Metropolitans of Moscow, the Bolshevik Patriarchs, and those who revived the influence of the Russian Orthodox Church after the fall of the Soviet Union, ending with the present Patriarch, Kirill, who is, to say the least, a very fascinating individual and probably the wealthiest of any churchman in the world. So, until next time, до свидания и спасибо за внимание.